Hi folks, welcome to today's color process video. Right, today's comic I wanted to do something that would um, take me a bit less time to do, but at the same time still look nice. Um, so I went with a process where I rendered nearly everything in gradients, at least the background elements. And then once those gradients were laid down, I then touch them up a bit using like the kind of grainy brush tool I use just to give a bit more texture to things and make it look a bit less artificial, a bit less obviously digital. On top of that, just again as a way of saving time with coloring, and also I suppose for aesthetic reasons, I decided to use pretty much the same colors throughout. So if you look at the cube character, Cubert, the um, the red that I gave his lips, I used the same red on or at least the same kind of I believe it's the same color. I use it for the ground. I was going to say in the background, but obviously the background, but the ground and also the sky. And then for both the ground and sky, I use the same gradient, like yellow into red, but I just did it at opposite ends. Um, or did I? No, I actually didn't. But I still used that gradient. Um, and once they were all laid down, then it was just a matter of, as I said, getting that brush tool and just touching things up. So with the ground colors, for example, I just wanted to add just a touch of purple to it, just to make it look a bit less samey, and just to add a bit more volume to it, and just to make things look a bit more interesting. Um, and then obviously I did the same with the sky, which is, I mean, well, I only did it with the sky in the last panel, but it's there. Um, I was going to keep things mostly, like I was thinking of keeping things mostly flat, but yeah, as I went on, I just added more and more touches like that. Like I'll bring your attention to the last panel now. I don't know if you're at this point in the video, but if you have the comic open beside you, just look at that. But if you look at the kind of sculpture mountain thing in the background, at first that was just going to be just like the shadows you see on that thing. It was just going to be like a flat, like black, or kind of like an earthy brown color. However, I just decided to experiment with it, and I tried adding a touch of gradient to it, where I started with like one color was like the purple tone I had been using for the ground and the sky, and the other tone was the kind of brownish tone I was going for with the shadows. And then I just, not using the gradient tool this time, just using the brush tool, I gradually added just a touch of gradient to that, and it turned out quite nicely. Like I was thinking before I went into coloring this comic that I was going to beautifully render everything in that last panel and like go for a more painterly look to things, like make things look really kind of well rendered in 3D. But um, for time purposes and partly for aesthetic reasons, I decided not to do that. Excuse me, and to go with this kind of in between kind of style where it's not quite flat, but it's not quite painted either. It's kind of meeting both methods in the middle. and it turned out quite nicely, I have to say. Like, I was kind of worried at first when I was working on this and I was rendering everything in the gradients that things looked a bit too fake and overly digital. But just adding those like brush strokes to things and just touching up that gradient, like giving it a more handcrafted kind of look, really made the difference. I have to say. And I really like how the colors worked out, where it's mostly just reds, yellows, and purples. I mean, there's not really much beyond that. Oh, barring the obviously the green that I used for Cubert's shoes, and the only reason I changed his shoes to that color was because I noticed when I changed the when I added like the grayscale layer to everything just to check what the contrast was like, that his shoes weren't contrasting very well against the red of the ground. So I just went with like I lightened the color on his shoes, and then I changed it to green because it just seemed to work. It just seemed to really make them pop out that bit more. Um, you'll also notice that the clouds in the last panel, like I was going to go for kind of like a pinkish red kind of color to them, but I decided instead to go for a light green, kind of doing a gradient into a slightly sky blue. Um, and I just did this because I felt it kind of broke up that panel a bit more, because I felt the I felt the color of the clouds was too similar to the color of the mountain sculpture um, that was in front of them, obviously. And even though the contrast was fine, I still felt things needed to be broken up a bit more. So I just did that with the clouds, and yeah, it did the trick. Another thing I did was I felt the need just to add like just an indication of like mountains or something in the background, like behind the mountain monument thing. So I simply just got like my flat brush tool and I just did a squiggle in the background. Like I just created a new layer that went on top of the cloud layer, but beneath the mountain ground layer, say. Um, and I just went with kind of like a blue purple kind of color to that, and then I reduced its opacity just slightly, just to give it that impression of these mountains kind of fading into the atmosphere in the distance. Because like if you ever look at if you can look out the window and you can see like hills off in the distance, you'll notice that as things recede into the distance, they kind of take on some of the there's like a haze that affects the coloring. So I find like giving like distant objects in scenes like this kind of like a blue or purple kind of color really helps make them look like they're off in the distance and a part of the background. So yeah, I think that's everything I have to say about this one. So I will leave it at that. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you at the next video. Take care.